Welcome back to The Path to Growth. Today we're exploring how distribution is evolving in an era defined by AI, cybersecurity and global expansion. Joining me is Ben Johnson of Dicker Data, a company that's grown from humble beginnings in 1978 to become a $3.5 billion leader in distribution across Australia and New Zealand. Ben, a very warm welcome from Australia.
Matt, thanks for having me here today. And also, congratulations on your recent induction into the Folio Legends Hall of Fame. I just caught that on social.
Oh, great. Yes, no, thank you. I've been lucky to work with a lot of very talented people over my career. So listen, we appreciate you making time. You're definitely our first guest that is thousands of miles away and not in the contiguous states, United States. So you win the prize for furthest guest. Well done. So let's get straight into it, right? So Dicker Data, as a lot of people may not know, has really transformed from a small Australian distributor to what you'd probably say is a $3.5 billion powerhouse today, I think with over 10,000 partners. And that's quite some story, right? So what have been some of the key milestones on that journey?
Sure. So we were founded back in 1978 by our CEO or former CEO and chairman, David Dicker. Now, he was working in his father's roof truss business at the time, doing all the calculations manually. And he happened to go to the US and stumble across a company called Vector Graphic. And anyway, he bought one of their devices, their pieces of hardware, and brought it back to Australia and started using it in his father's business and saw how it just transformed the way they were able to work. And so as the story goes, he collected his savings and went back to the US, bought 5 of them, and the rest is really history. And a bit of a fun fact, in the early 90s through to the early 2000s, David Dicker was the only male employee in our business. And the early success of the business was actually built on hiring young mothers that were returning to work, wanting flexible hours. So we had a really progressive culture in the 80s and the 90s and in the early 2000s. But the Dicker Data story is really one of compounding success over time. It's not an overnight success, but there are a few key principles that have gotten us to where we are today. And some of those are around being nimble and agile. We've got a really great decentralized culture and decentralized structure, but a really high accountability for high performers. So some of the key milestones that have gotten us to where we are today, back in the 80s, our first big breakthrough was becoming the first Australian distributor for Toshiba. And the next big break came in the early 90s when we were appointed as a compact distributor. And that really broke out our scale to about 3,000 partners. Now, in the early 2000s, when HP acquired Compaq, that was really when the rockets got strapped onto the business and things took off. But it wasn't an easy path because at the time they were rationalizing the distributors from 6 down to 3. And we were lucky enough to be retained. And it was largely due to our partner loyalty and the service and what we provided. One of the next big milestones was in around 2011 when we listed on the ASX. And really that was to unlock access to capital for growth, which is a really big thing for distributors. And then there are a few major acquisitions that have followed that have really helped to develop the business. There was a transformative acquisition in 2014 of a company called Express Data, and that gave us our first foray into New Zealand as well. And then in 2021, we acquired what was regarded at the time as the Dicker Data of New Zealand, a company called Exceed. And we paid around $68 million for them. And that really gave us a strong number 2 position in Australia. And then more recently in 22 and 23, we have acquired a couple of security and access and surveillance businesses in both Australia and New Zealand, which has helped us to further diversify our mix.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, that is quite a story. I did not know anything about, the only male employee for quite some time. So being so early in a progressive culture, which is actually very rare in tech, because for the longest time, tech was a very male heavy culture, very engineering kind of focused or based. So that's fascinating. So let's pick up a little bit on the acquisitions. You mentioned a couple there, and acquisitions are hard, right? People always think it's getting the deal over the line. I mean, that's incredibly hard, but actually the real work starts the moment the signatures are signed, the ink is dry. Because you have different cultures, you've got different management or POS systems and all kinds of things. So talk to us a little bit about the lessons that you and Dickadata have learned from integrating large competitors into your culture.
Yeah, sure. So I think firstly, I'll just give you a little bit of context on how it changed our business because at the time we were around 450 million a year in revenue and about 100 staff. And the Express Data business that we purchased was about 800 million in revenue and about 450 people in terms of the staff. But the big difference between the two businesses was our profitability level was much higher. And so obviously it presented a challenge having to take a culture of 400 and integrate that with your culture of 100 and do it your way. And so one of the big lessons that we learned along that process was the value of having process. We were a much smaller business at the time. And so we moved really, really quickly. And so we learned the importance of slowing down, listening to your people and bringing them on the journey with you. And so we realized that we kept moving as fast as we did without proper communication, we were just going to leave our people behind. And the other things that came from that was around learning the value of curiosity and challenging the status quo. There was a lot of examples of things that people believe things had to be done a certain way. And often when we unpacked those, even with the vendors that we had, we found that there were ways around things. There were more creative approaches to doing things. And just because it had always been done a certain way didn't mean it was necessarily the best way for the business moving forward. And the success of the integration really came down to the people, the process, and the curiosity. And that's what drove the right outcomes for us.
Yeah. And you were a big part of that, right? I have that right? You were heavily involved in that integration work?
Yeah, look, when you're 100-person business, you do wear many hats. And I think, you asked me the question in the prep for this around my own path to growth. I've always had this really strong curiosity and interest in business and how it works. And so I was never going to stay in my lane or in my box and just do my role. So part of the integration, I was working with the finance team, I was working with the IT teams, the operation teams. I even remember we had to extend our warehouse to be able to fit all the stock. And the Sunday before we opened, I was in there sticking the location stickers on in the warehouse and configuring our ERP system to be able to cope with that. But I think that's where growth comes from, right? Is just exposing yourself to as many areas as possible.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I totally agree with that. I think I can't remember whose quote this is, but I think we learn the most when we're uncomfortable. And so taking yourself to the edge is when you actually kind of, you're just exposed and you realize that and you learn from that versus kind of, feeling comfortable where maybe you're not pushing yourself.
I think so. I completely agree. And now I think one of the lessons I've learned is to be comfortable when you're uncomfortable and leaning into that and using that as a point of leverage or a point of strength and not shying away from that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I'm a huge believer in that. All right. So let's switch gears a little bit. Because we can't possibly go more than 10, 15 minutes without throwing in the word or the phrase AI. It's everywhere. Every day when I open websites and print that I do read, it's AI. We know it's coming, but it does feel a little bit. When you and I spoke before, that perhaps Australia and New Zealand are lagging a little bit behind the US and Europe. What do you think's driving that difference right now?
I think part of it is the investment. So if you look at the US, Europe, even Singapore most recently, there's been multi-billion or multi-million dollar investments from the governments And what that's doing is it's helping to de-risk AI for businesses because there's a lot of skepticism around, is this actually going to have an impact? Does this technology have legs? Is it going to be there in 10 years? And what's the impact for my business? The second thing is we're facing real talent shortages here in Australia. And part of that is because the US has really become an anchor for AI talent now. And we need more robust pathways for local talent to upskill. And we're getting better at that, but we're not quite there yet. We also need to do more in our region to help people learn how to use AI more effectively, both from a business and a personal context, because many people are using AI at a very basic level. And then you've got technologists, which I like to count myself inside that group, who are experimenting more and trying to push the boundaries and find better ways of using the technology. But for the broader population who are using AI, it's not quite as simple. And so there's a role for the channel and a role for all of us to help people step up in that area. And the last thing is we recently conducted a survey with about 500 CIOs in Australia with end users. And about 60% of them reported being aware of unauthorized or shadow AI usage within their businesses. Now, this seems like a bit of a culture thing that we're dealing with at the moment, where businesses are letting their employees experiment and they're not sanctioning the tools. They're not necessarily across the risk and what's going on, but because they don't have a solid foundation or a solid plan on what to do, this seems like the path of least resistance. And a lot of people now want access to AI tools in their roles. And so this is an easy way for business to just let it happen. But I feel like we haven't seen or felt the ramifications of that just yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, as soon as the CIO or the CISO gets some kind of complaint that public, confidential information is out in one of these LLMs because somebody's taken a bunch of information and thrown it into an agent and asked it a series of questions, and now the agent has learned off it, then they'll wake up pretty quickly. But what role do you see for the distributors in making AI more practical for for both partners and obviously the customers?
Yeah, I think the first thing is it comes back to one of the basics of distribution, which is simplifying the complex. I speak to partners almost every day, and there's a lot of overwhelm out there right now. End users want AI, but they don't know what AI or how they want AI. But the partners are then wedged because they feel like they're going to lose their customers' business if they don't give them something. And so, and also they've got to prove the ROI on that. And so there's a couple of things we're doing now to help make this a bit more of a reality. Distribution is always built around partnerships. So one of the things we're doing is we've partnered with an Australian AI development company called 365 Mesh. And what they do is they offer both out-of-the-box AI solutions as well as bespoke, custom-built AI solutions. So that's helping our partners and their end customers start to see what the use cases look like and helps them get moving in a bit of an easier way. Now, the next step is distribution has always had the responsibility of training and enablement and certification for partners. But now we need to start doing the train the trainer work with the partners so that they can train their end users, because this is the next evolution of the channel and how the knowledge flow's got to happen. And it sort of comes back to that point I just raised. The last piece on this is there's an evolution happening inside our business, and I think in terms of distribution overall, where we're moving from solution and vendor aggregation into a world where partner aggregation is a new vector we all have to consider. And what I mean by that is we're building things like partner to partner networks, where we validate the partner's credentials and technical capabilities. And then when another partner wins an opportunity that's outside of their technical scope, we can introduce them to a vetted and verified partner that can help them deliver that solution. And it's sort of a safe pathway to do it. Now, this is the way that distributors have to think to extract maximum value from the networks and the IP that we've built. And we sit on these gold mines of data that we know so much about the partners and all the rest, that we've got to start exposing that, and we've got to find self-service, easy mechanisms for partners to be able to leverage that expertise and strength that we're sitting on.
Yeah, no, I love what you said there. Just kind of the impact on the value prop of distribution, right, and how you that's going to evolve. But I also almost a throwaway comment, but it's actually the foundation of it all, right? You're just seeing so much data, and AI LLMs are all about data. I mean, that's what they live and breathe on, and so you've got so much valuable insight to be able to make a difference. I mean, just on the AI thing, from what we see in our research, and what we hear from partners is that first off, companies shouldn't take a let's go buy AI approach, right? There's no buy AI. It's going to take multiple partners to actually create a solution. Secondly, you much better off focusing it on small workflow challenges that you see are ripe essentially for productivity gains versus trying to build some kind of engine for the whole business. And if you make those small incremental gains, the ROI is very, very clear, and it becomes apparent very quickly versus kind of building something and then go, I don't know what is it doing it? Like, it's not gonna that's not going to happen. And of course, for any company, please have an AI policy, get every employee to sign it before you give them access to a tool, because there's a whole host of things around data. But I was at a conference recently, just coming back to kind of where Australia and New Zealand is, right? And I mean, AI is actually almost becoming geopolitical, right? Because it's about sovereign power. And so a lot of what we're seeing right now with, Nvidia and China and all these other things about, well, who's going to hold the keys to the future? My understanding is Australia's looking at putting in its first AI factory. Is that right? And if so, do you think that's going to help change the equation? Will that accelerate adoption?
Yeah, so we've just played our role in the build of Australia's first AI factory, sovereign AI factory. And we supplied the kit to a company called Reset Data, who's built that in Melbourne, in Australia. And they've partnered with a company called Centuria Capital to make it happen. This is the difference in Australia, where it's private capital that's making these initiatives happen. Now, whilst you can argue that we've had sovereign AI capability in Australia through the likes of the hyperscalers for years and their local data center investments, these first sovereign AI factories are the first time that we've got dedicated high performance AI infrastructure available in the country. Now, what that does is that drives cost efficiency when people are going to train LLMs and get access to that tech. It also sort of starts to act as a talent anchor for our country. Like, it shows that we're serious about this. And it also provides scalable access to the technology, which is very expensive and stuff that people can't access just themselves. It also signals that Australia is getting very serious about AI, even if that is led from the private sector. And lastly, it's access to the technology, such as the NVIDIA inferencing models. Typically, if you're an Australian business or even the Australian government and you wanted to use those models, you would have to put that data offshore to be able to access and use the NVIDIA technology. Once we have these AI factories onshore, businesses can run it here in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, so that I'm sure will take away any of those kind of geopolitical concerns, sovereignty, data sovereignty, and presumably, I'm sure will be more efficient from a cost point of view in terms of running the models. Okay, so let's kind of stay kind of on AI, but let's pivot away a little bit, right? So you've mentioned this before. I want to pick up on it. I mean, obviously, the role of distribution is complex, but probably at the core of it is one of trust, right? Just vendor trust and partner trust. Now, Dicker Data is very interesting because NVIDIA, which obviously is kind of our AI connection, but Citrix, RSA, Commvault, some of the biggest vendors are trusting Dicker Data. It's almost, well, I believe, exclusively, right, in your region. Tell us a little bit about what convinces them to choose that exclusive relationship over other global distributors.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Matt. And the key word is the one that you've landed there, and that's trust. Now, it sounds simple, but we execute this very well. We align our objectives with the vendor priorities, and ultimately it comes down to how well we can execute and deliver on that. Now, the way we're focused and structured internally allows us to tie the KPIs of our individuals to those vendor objectives. And then we focus on getting the basics right, transparency, communication, and operational operational excellence. Now, when vendors want to make the change to an exclusive model, they're usually ready to accelerate their growth, but they need a more flexible and a more innovative way to achieve it. And one of the ways that we do that is we have this model of reinvestment in the vendors that we have. And we've always been massive advocates of investing ahead of where we are today to get to where we need to be sooner. And so when a vendor goes exclusive with a distributor, they need to know that the distributor is going to be in this for the long term and that you're going to continually invest to keep them growing. But it is, of course, a two-way commitment. And the success of the vendor becomes really pegged to how well the distributor can execute in the region. And this just reiterates that importance of executional excellence and doing what the distributor says it will do. Now, managing multiple distributors is actually quite costly for vendors. And many vendors that are looking at an exclusive model are looking at the ROI within their existing distributors. And if I put myself in the vendor's chair with this, if I've got a distributor who's performing well and delivering really high ROI for me, I have a high level of trust and transparency with that distributor, and I have a high level of confidence in that distributor's ability to execute, then it's quite clear who I should be partnering with. But some would actually argue this is probably the point where some vendors should introduce a third distributor rather than focusing down to a single. But the argument on that is, unless your market is so largely untapped and you have such a massive competitive advantage and your existing distributors just simply can't keep up with the business that you're generating, more often than not, you're just diluting the focus of your distributors by doing that and driving your own cost up.
Interesting. So let's just pick up on that a little bit then, because we're in that exclusive relationship. Is there an example you can share with us how, where your approach, the agility, speed to market has helped a vendor or a partner, get to market faster or improve their results?
Yeah, I'll give you a vendor example and a partner example. And I'll give you a non-exclusive vendor example just to show you the difference on what we can do. So back in, I think it was around 2017, it was when Cisco pivoted from being an enterprise-focused vendor, and they really wanted to start targeting the SMB segment and the mid-market segment. Now, we partnered really closely with them, understood what was important to Cisco at the time, and built plans specifically around each of their markets and each of their technology stacks. And long story short, we actually became the first distributor in the world that's not a global to win Cisco Global Distributor of the Year in 2019 as a result of the work we did and the plans that we built to get Cisco into the SMB. And they actually took our plans and used them to replicate around the world. So that's a great example of how a locally focused distributor can actually punch above their weight and sort of showcase to the rest of the world how it's done. On the partner front, we had a recent example just a few months ago where there was a partner in Australia called Integrity, and they were trying to build an AI-powered solution for doctors or physicians and help them optimize their billing. Now, that partner kind of started hitting some roadblocks. So what we did was we got them access to Microsoft's global engineering teams. And what that meant was they then got priority access to development and resources and so on. And ultimately, they ended up building a solution that's now seeing the average GP clinic or doctor clinic uplift their revenue by about $900,000 a year, $900,000 a year, or on average, $150,000 per doctor, just by streamlining the claiming and all the back-end processes. And this is a really good story because it means that they can now afford to put more doctors on, reducing patient wait times. And it's just one of those compounding stories.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very real impact, both to society, but also financially. That's amazing. So let's stay on Dicker data for a moment. And you'll notice I'm flipping between saying data and data, because when you say data, it sits in my brain, and then I say data, which I know is the Australian way of saying it, which is it's making myself laugh. So yeah, another area where distribution has changed, of course, is every business is trying to be a platform, right? And so we talk about marketplaces now and partner enablement, but distribution is as much about platforms as it is about products, right? And being able to get products into certain parts of the world. How is your digital marketplace now fueling partner growth?
I think you're absolutely right that distribution is no longer just about moving boxes. Digital platforms are just as important as physical logistics in this world. And the marketplace is about simplifying those complex B2B transactions and making them as seamless as the B2C experience, which partners now expect. Now, one of the ways that we do that is we develop everything ourselves in-house, which gives us the speed and agility that our competitors generally can't match. And this means that we bring new features to market quicker. But really, what's fueling the growth for our partners in this area? There's three vectors. It's data, speed, and then capability. I mentioned earlier that we're sitting on an enormous amount of highly valuable data, and it's not just our own, it's vendor data and also end customer data that's shared with us through the sales process. And now it's about how we operationalize that data for our partners and helping them to do things like identify at-risk renewals. How do they boost profitability with inside particular deals? Or how do they attain a higher vendor program status? And so AI tools are now starting to allow our partners to interact with these data sets by using natural language. So we're allowing them to do things like, say, show me my upcoming renewals for customer ABC, and it'll provide them with the upsell plays and all the rest. And traditional distribution was about product recommendations. So you bought a laptop and maybe you want a bag with that. But now it's about predictive, actionable insights. And to steal a Microsoft term, our marketplace has to become the co-pilot of the partners because we see ourselves as becoming the digital co-sell assistant now for our partners. So that when they go out to, say, visit their customer, before they go out, they rely on our data and our insights to understand how to better sell to that end customer and where the right opportunities sit. I touched on speed as well. Our decentralized culture empowers our internal teams to move really, really quickly and make rapid decisions. And an example of where that's helped us win most recently was with Adobe. Adobe released these new things called high growth offers. And we were the first distributor globally to launch these in our marketplace, giving our partners an actual competitive advantage. And vendors love the speed because it means that we can get their new programs and products and solutions to market faster. And because of this, you'll find our technical teams are actually the ones sitting on the calls with the global vendor technical teams, helping to shape their programs. And the last thing I mentioned was around capability. When I look back to my early days at Data some 18 years ago now, we built a lot of our success around helping SMB to punch above their weight. And if you fast forward to today, sort of our consistency and executional excellence means that we've become a company that's punching above our weight and outpacing our competition when you look at our digital platforms. And again, that comes back to that hiring of really good people, giving them a platform to build their own success and then empowering them. And of course, the decentralized culture.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that co-pilot to digital sales within the I think that's a great way of looking at it. So you've, as we said at the top of this, you have, I think it's like 10,000 plus, right, partners who are engaged. Where are you seeing the fastest growth though? Like in which area?
Yeah, so we've got about 10,000 partners in Australia and a further 2,500 in New Zealand. And at the moment, we're seeing the most growth in the mid-market and the enterprise segments. And SMB is still a little bit depressed in Australia, largely due to macroeconomic factors. But we're starting to see that turn. Now, if you look at our results from the first half of this year, our fastest growing segment was software. And that was largely driven by demand for cybersecurity and really strong momentum around virtualization. And of course, there's your typical traditional ones like productivity, cloud infrastructure, and your digital experience side. That grew about 21% in the first half of 2025. Devices are also back. Now, devices are cool again, thanks to the new Copilot Plus PCs and AI PCs. And for the first time in a long time, you're not just upgrading to a new chassis. There is new technology within that chassis that's actually going to make your life easier. And so the Windows 10 end of support has sort of fueled that growth as well. And when you look at Copilot Plus PCs, the all-day battery life is a really big winner. There's also a point in here around chip to cloud security. And I can give you a quick story on the way that Microsoft do this, because it's something that people don't usually think about. They think about their endpoint security and software, but they don't think about the device. Microsoft have a technology that's in the new PCs called Pluton. Now, Pluton actually was first developed for the Xbox. Now, if you wind back to the Xbox One, the Xbox 360, when that was launched, some bright spark somewhere in the world worked out that if you got a power drill and went through the motherboard to the exact right depth and the exact right spot, you'd void all the copywriting on it, and your neighbor could DVD copy any game and you'd be able to play it. And it was called a kamikaze kit that they sold to do this, because if you drilled just a little bit too far, your Xbox was gone.
That's that gone. Yeah.
So when Microsoft actually launched the next Xbox, they launched Pluton Security. And to this day, it has still not been cracked. And Pluton Security is the security that sits inside Azure servers. It sits inside every Copilot Plus PC, and it gives IT admins the ability to catch bad actors before we get to the software layer when a PC is booting up. So it's just an interesting one. But the last piece that we're seeing is data center infrastructure is back in growth to the tune of around 17% as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's very much what we also see here in North America and in Europe. I think one of the reasons on the the PC refresh, yes, Windows 10 end of support, but I think it's a great way for employees and companies to give employees access to AI on-prem, if you know what I mean. Like, it's kind of like, okay, you get all the functionality and the features inside of this very secure, smaller environment, and then maybe when we're ready or we get more sophisticated, then obviously we'll move into a much bigger environment, and once we've developed our policies. But it's certainly, I think it gives employees a simple kind of couple of steps to go, wow, this is really useful. And then, of course, people start to become curious.
It makes it tangible and it makes it real, right? And it brings AI to the edge, which is part of what we've got to do. But it also, there's a responsibility on the partners and the organizations to make sure that they're training users on how to use it, because it's all well and good to give you access to Copilot, but if you don't know how to prompt or how to extract the value out of it, it's not going to become your go-to. And I say to everyone all the time, AI is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets and the better you get at it. And so that's really the approach we need to take as an industry.
Yeah, very good. All right, so let's pivot off that. So Dicker Data, I mean, look, you're a very big company now, right? From humble beginnings. Australia, New Zealand, you've kind of cracked those markets, but it's a great big world out there, right? And like the channel company, where we've moved from the US to the UK to Germany to Asia to Australia, New Zealand, and Latin America, I'm sure Dicker Data's got some bigger ambitions. So what's next geographically for the company?
Yeah, it's another great question, Matt. We've had a really strong growth trajectory in both the Australian and New Zealand markets over the last decade, and we've amassed a lot of market share in that time. And there is still plenty of opportunity in our market, but naturally we need to start looking beyond our shores for that next phase of growth. We have announced to the market publicly that we're considering expansion into the Asia Pacific region for us, but for us it's a plan of doing it organically. So we want to find a way to do it where we get access to the right vendors, we find the right people, and then we replicate our success in those markets by using the same methodologies that we've done in both Australia and New Zealand. But yeah, it is the next logical step for the business.
Well, I'm originally English, but I've been in the US for a long time. But whenever you go to that region, it's mind blowing just how big it is, right? The fact it can take me 8-9 hours to get from Singapore to the next market, right? Or to the next country, or I think it's 8 or 9 to Australia. I mean, it's just absolutely mind blowing. And of course, it's complex, right? Because there's a lot of different cultures there. So, we talked a little bit about culture and how Dicker Data did a really good job as a small company, kind of absorbing a much bigger company that would have probably had a much more defined culture. But how are you going to replicate, or what do you think your approach to be, will replicating the success you had culturally in these different geographies with totally different dynamics?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one that we've got to work out. But what we've got to do is we've got to replicate the success that we've built in New Zealand because we learned the power of localization. And we learned the power of, we have great ideas in Australia and they have great ideas in New Zealand, but they don't always translate directly into those markets. So it's about empowering the local teams to adapt and shape the business to their market needs. And we've also learned where our operational strengths sit for both across countries and how we can support those functions across the borders for maximum leverage. And so at the moment, we have really close collaboration between our Australian and New Zealand teams. And so we'll have a similar setup when we expand into Asia. Now, interestingly as well, we've seen a lot of our vendors actually recommending to partners in Asia that they should attend our virtual training and enablement sessions from Australia and New Zealand because they see us as best practice for where we are. So we have a level of confidence going in there. But how do we replicate that culture? The first thing is we always hire based on culture and attitude first. The skills and the semantics can be taught, but getting the right mindset and the right people is absolutely essential. And then it'll come down to how we balance that empowerment with the support that we provide locally. Now, we have to, or our success has been built on providing a platform for other people to build their success on top of. And so finding the right people, and it's a very specific type of person that's going to be able to build that sort of market for us. But they also need to be accountable and rewarded accordingly. Now, we drive both accountability both locally and across the supporting teams, which means that people in Australia will have skin in the game for New Zealand, and those people will also have skin in the game for Asia. And the last thing is we need to reward success. So we've never been a business that shies away from rewarding success. If our people over deliver, then we compensate them accordingly. And so we'll be very intentional in the way that we reward that high performance and the way that we structure the KPIs to make sure that we're getting the outcomes that we need when we expand into those regions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's certainly going to be complex, but I think you, as a company, you've sort of proven that you have that mindset. You have the right mindset to listen, learn, be curious, right, and then adapt where necessary. So let's as we bring this home, let's kind of go to your personal sort of path to growth, because you mentioned you've been with the company 18 years. Frankly, you don't look old enough, so I'm going to assume it was straight out of middle school. You decided to skip high school and just join. So talk to us a little bit though about your own personal journey, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually joined the company during my university summer break, and I was only supposed to be there for 6 weeks on work placement. Now, the running joke is that they forgot about me, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In my time at Dicker, I've always been extremely curious, interested, and passionate about how business works. And like I said earlier, I never wanted to just stay in my one role or where I be bound by one role. So early on, I would shadow the warehouse or shadow sales, and I would always try and find ways to add value beyond my role. And I can give you a little anecdote of how that happened. I noticed that the sales team, we used to have this spreadsheet where they'd be looking up the postcodes to see what freight level needed to be applied to a particular order. And I saw how cumbersome that was. The semester earlier at university, we'd done a little bit of programming. So I wrote a little application which would tie into the purchase order and actually pull off the postcode and give the salesperson the exact freight rate to apply. And it was an example of how I wanted to be proactive and I wanted to be engaged and I just wanted to add value anywhere I could in the business. The next thing is around building relationships across our business and across the industry and understanding the different perspectives of all those different people and the challenges that they face. And that helps to shape your own journey. And I also think my journey to growth has been the compound impact of execution over time. I really take a continuous improvement approach to what I do, and that growth mindset way of approaching business are absolutely essential from where I sit. And I think I said earlier, I learned to say yes to the opportunities, even when they felt out of my depth early on. And I've been in many rooms that I felt like I probably shouldn't have been in. And I've navigated my way through many conversations, which I wasn't sure if it was done the right way. But in the final upshoot, it's you're given access to particular opportunities throughout your career. And those opportunities often only come once. And so you have to do the best you can with what you've got at every stage of your career. And ultimately, that's led to where I am today, having been through many parts of the organization. And again, today, it's all about finding ways to add value to every part of the business that I touch.
Yeah, I love that story. So presumably university is off the table at this point. You've moved past that.
Yeah, well, they tried to get me to drop out of university and stay with the company, but I didn't want to do that. So I did finish my degree, and they just let me work.
Yeah,
they let me work casually. I just turned up and put in a timesheet while I finished.
I love it. Well, look, this has been fantastic. I always like to wrap up with kind of couple of key things I've heard. And I mean, you just said it again, right? But compounding success versus kind of instant success. Challenge the status quo, right? I'm a huge believer in that. People, process, and culture, right? If you can nail those three things, right, you are halfway home. 100% agree. You got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. The organizations don't learn, individuals won't learn. You won't have the chance to embrace success. Embrace the opportunity to be more successful, develop if you're not comfortable being uncomfortable. I really liked how you talked about the evolution, how we're now shifting into this partner to partner networks, right? And how that's part of the value now of distribution. How the company's been so successful and continues to grow. Why? Because it's built on trust and being aligned to the objectives of the vendors, right? And just having that relationship. You mentioned this more than once, simplify the complex. And I just think, tech is so complex, business is complex today. Take all the complexity out of it, right? And just make it easy for people to adapt. And then lastly, something that rings dear to my heart, I'm a huge believer in global products delivered locally. It's the power of localization, right? What we do in the US is different to the way we would talk and transact business in Australia, New Zealand. Even though it's the same language, right? There are cultural differences, and you have to accept that and really lean into it. So, listen, Ben, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for joining today.
Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I've also enjoyed the conversation. And I hope your listeners have taken a few little nuggets of wisdom out of this to help them in their business and help them on their path to growth.
Ben, thanks so much for joining us today. Your perspective on driving growth through execution, partner marketplaces, and expansion across the Asia-Pacific region is exactly what the channel needs to hear. That's it for this episode of The Path to Growth. I'm Matt Yorke. Thanks for listening.